So moving on.
So suffice it to say, the public service, all branches of the public service, as far as I'm aware, are fully on board with this, including BOM. And so, as you say, they're actually distorting our temperature records in order to kind of smush it into the climate narrative. Yeah. Well, right, what are we looking at here?
Which causes me most distress about the public service is that it is heavily unionised. And the union is actually the stormtroopers of the Labor Party. The Labor Party is the political arm of the unions. The Labor Party, since the 1800s, has had a close association with Marxism and communism.
Yes.
And it is to this day. Anthony Albanese was a prominent member of the Communist Party when he was at university. And it is no coincidence that Mayo, who is an overt communist, was one of the major faces on the Yes campaign.
Thomas Mayo, who was very. I think that was perhaps some of the more powerful clips that were shared that really strengthened the no vote was actually hearing these people in their own words.
We really came close to destroying this country if they had been able to fiddle with the Constitution. I want Section 51, subsection 26, which confers upon the federal government the right to make special laws on the basis of a citizen's race. I want that removed from our Constitution.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Have confronted a number of politicians about this, and none of them are interested. That tells you about our politicians, right?
Yeah. We cannot essentially entrench racism.
Not in our Constitution. Because of its existence and because of its legacy, I believe we need a clause in our Constitution that specifically prohibits government at all levels, and I stress at all levels, and all government-funded agencies from discriminating on the basis of a citizen's race or gender. That should be.
I could not agree more. And by the way, I loathe the word gender. It's called sex. We're a sexually dimorphic species. There are males and there are females. This word gender just needs to be absolutely, excised from the lexicon because it's nonsense. And sorry, this is not a criticism of you, Kevin, but I refuse to use the word gender because it is basically, it is a neo-Marxist term. So discrimination on the basis of.
I've always avoided using the word sex because it could be confused with copulation or intercourse.
People kind of go, ooh, it's like a rude word, but no, it's biological sex.
Lent to the polite word of gender, but I don't mind. The sex.
It's been hijacked, though. That term has been hijacked. So I'm glad you raised the issue of the unions again, by the way, Kevin, because I meant to mention this before, but the unions were absolutely shocking during the fake pandemic, and it's really good to see the rise of Red Union, providing an alternative to these kind of, Labor Party affiliated unions that, as you say, are just another arm of the octopus. They did not represent workers' rights. That is the Labor Party affiliated unions. They did not represent workers' rights. They did not stand up for their members who did not want to have an experimental substance injected into their bodies. So, as far as I'm concerned, the unions, the old unions can just go and burn in hell if there is such a place. I really am excited to see the rise of, AMPS and all the other alternatives to unions for nurses and teachers and police officers and so forth that Red Union is providing.
For the interest of every police officer listening to this, I personally contacted the heads by telephone and by writing of every police union in this country, and not one of them was prepared to say, this shouldn't happen to our police officers. I happen to love the police. I believe that they are the thin line between order and chaos, and we should look after them. We are blessed in this country, in the main, to have excellent, extraordinary police officers.
And many of them were driven out of the force because of either because of the jab mandate,
or who were contributing $300 a year to did nothing for you and would not stand up for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
All right, back to Climategate. Yes, yes. For those who haven't heard of Climategate, do you want to just give a little capsule summary of what Climategate was?
Yeah, look, what it comes down to is it demonstrated that our so-called climate scientists are corrupt. That they had a narrative which they had embarked upon, and they may have found out that, oh, this isn't actually the case, but my reputation is now in danger. So instead of fessing up and saying, look, we've made a silly mistake, they dug deeper in the hole they were in. And these emails were released by somebody who said, look, really, this is not on. We've got to let the public know that the so-called climate scientists are up and up liars and fraudsters. And that's what's going on here. These Climategate emails showed that the so-called climate scientists were colluding together to create a false narrative. They were hiding reality from the public.
They weren't just forging data, although, you know, that's bad enough. It was also that they had got control of the editorial bodies of all the scientific journals that published, you know, studies on this subject. And they stacked the peer review boards of those so that, you know, anyone who submitted a paper that actually challenged this narrative could not even get it accepted for peer review. They just wouldn't be published. And this is, you know, a huge part of crafting the narrative is basically say, well, everyone agrees with us. Well, actually, a lot of people didn't agree, but they could not get published. And then, of course, because they can't get published, that means they lose funding. They can't get, you know, they put in grant applications, but their grant applications get denied. And so they either, you know, leave that field and go study something else, or if they want to get their grants funded so that they can actually, you know, afford to live, they fall in line with the narrative. Anyway, so, Climategate, look it up, folks. James Corbett, if you just type in corbettreport.com and then look in the search bar for Climategate or just generally climate, James Corbett has put in an amazing amount of work documenting this whole climate narrative. It was actually from him that I learned about the whole Morris Strong angle too. So, okay, now what are we looking at here, Kevin?
You amaze me, Robin, with the depth of your knowledge. Maybe you should be doing this presentation because you're bang on target every time. You came up with Morris Strong. You've just come up with Corbett. I mean, you're right on the target. I didn't go there. I actually planned for this to be a shorter presentation, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I keep dragging you off track. So we've got
having I hope listeners are too. You might have to edit this and cut it down a bit. But anyway, look, this is the raw data from the remote sensing satellites, which, by the way, were plagued with heaps of problems, such that the error bars are of such magnitude one cannot actually draw any sort of conclusion with any problem.
So these are satellites that are that y-axis there. What's that measuring? Is that carbon dioxide?
No, that's the temperature.
That's temperature. Okay, so these are like low Earth orbit satellites, are they?
Yeah, they are. And what they're doing is they're measuring the rate at which I think their oxygen atoms are vibrating. And through that, they're able to determine what the temperature is at that particular altitude.
Right. So we see a downward trend in temperature. And then on the next slide.
Yep. On the next one, that's what they did to the data. It's
fiddling the numbers. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I could take you through Bernoulli's theorem and all that sort of stuff. There are actually three components to the amount of energy, which, by the way, in thermodynamics terms is called enthalpy. That's the thermal heat, the kinetic energy, and the potential energy, which is the air pressure. So it's much more complicated than this, but they use temperature as an indicator of how much energy is in a particular cell of air. Okay, this is the RSS unadjusted data, and you can see from 1996 when they started to 2016 the effect of El Ninos, and that gives some comfort to, hey, this might be pretty accurate. This is the raw data. And notice that it's basically flatlining.
No temperature.
I could take a particular part of that, which I did before, and I could show you that it's going down. I could take another part of it and show you that the temperature's going up. It just depends where you start measuring from.
Right. In other words, what do you plot on that x-axis? Where do you start? Where do you finish? Okay. But you can also see that there is this sort of fairly regular pattern of fluctuation between the La Niñas and the El Niños. And I presume this goes back, a long time, that we fluctuate between these cycles. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, this is from a fellow called Carl Mears, and this is really, really terrible. The yellow is what's predicted by the models. The blue is what Mears actually got, but the blue is the error bar, right?
Yep.
In other words, you should draw a black line through the middle of all of that blue to get, what might be close to the truth. But an error bar is an error bar. So if I was to say, no, look, what I'll do is back in 1980, things were working a heck of a lot better, hence the error bar is narrow there.
I was going to say, it's clear that the error bar is actually increasing in size as we go on. Why is that?
Because of the problems that they were experiencing with their measuring systems.
Gotcha. Okay. See that, and most people would be thinking, hang on a minute, isn't our technology more advanced now than it was in 1980?
No, that was all, frontline technology. It had a lot of wrinkles that they're trying to work out, like the Hubble telescope.
Yeah, but gotcha. Okay.
He took all of the top of the error bar and said, "Oh, that's the actual figure," when it's not. That's fraud. No, but that's fraud.
So if you go from the top of the error bar, it actually looks like the prediction, but in fact,
it's at the bottom of the prediction.
Middle. Yeah, if you go to the middle, it's like nowhere near it. All right. Yeah.
If I were to draw a line from the bottom of the thickest part of that blue line over on the right-hand side to the top of the error bar back at the beginning of this in 1980, I end up with a temperature that's going down, not up.
Yeah.
That is actually diverging away.
Yeah. Yep. Gotcha.
What comes out of this is you really can't make any sort of solid decision at this moment. You need more data. There's no definite signal. And
okay. So your take on this is look, I can't say for sure whether the Earth's average temperature, which again, what the hell does that mean? But I can't say for sure whether it's going up, whether it's going down, or whether it's flatlining, and therefore, we should not be making policies based on Earth temperature increasing. We should actually work harder to get more accurate data. Yeah,
exactly. And this is a little sophisticated, but they changed the wording. This is in things like the IPCC. Yeah. They changed the wording where they say that after 1998, the observations are likely to be below the simulated values, indicating that the simulation as a whole are predicting too much warming, and they basically water that down in the
didn't they ever? Well, one of the things that I remember James Corbett talking about with the IPCC is that when Maurice Strong initially convened the IPCC, there were three committees, and one of them was the scientific committee, and the second I can't remember, and the third was basically the committee that was to produce policy recommendations, right? And the thing was, the policy recommendations group, they actually wrote their report before the technical report was written. And then the scientists writing the technical report had to basically write their technical report to fit into the policy recommendations that had already been written.
That's right.
As soon as you learn that, it's like the whole thing is just, it's so clearly a scam. That,
it is.
And then the other thing was actually, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I may have the actual body, but I believe that it is the IPCC's remit to study anthropogenic, to study only that part of global temperature change that is attributable to human activity. Am I correct on that? I may be butchering the word.
You're right. It's all like when you hold a royal commission and you rig the terms of reference.
Define your terms of reference.
In the right direction.
And so if you're only funding research on the human attributable proportion of climate change or carbon dioxide concentration or whatever the hell it is that you're studying, if you're not studying the rest of it, you don't know how big or small of a role that human activity is playing in that. And that is even if you could possibly isolate that portion of climate change that is attributable to human activity, which I don't know how you could if you're not studying the entire topic area, including the effect of things like, that tilt on the Earth's axis, the Milankovitch cycles, and the changes in oceanic patterns and so forth. Anyway, so scan from back to front. All right, what are we looking at here? Measured average. Oh, this is ground temperatures. Yep.
It's the average ground temperature. And you were right when you were talking about in the 1930s, there was the Dust Bowl, and you can see that.
Look at that huge peak. And then again in the 50s.
It's off, and it's dropping off.
Yeah.
This is what they reported.
Oh, my God.
It's flashing back.
Yeah. One of these does not look like the other.
Yeah. It's scandalous. Yeah. Okay, this is close to me. This is Lismore. We had a terrific flood here in 2022, which was the direct result of government incompetence. But instead of government saying, oh, look, we've been remiss in that we should have built a dam back in 1954 when we bought all the land around Dunoon Creek. And we should have kept the Tuckambill Canal open because it allows 75% of the floodwater from Lismore to flow directly to Lennox Head and out the sea, where it does virtually no damage. We should have dredged the Richmond River so that the water could flow easily. We should have put in diversions along the Richmond River directly out to sea. Instead of all of that, it's climate change. Well, I went and looked at this at the rainfall record, and you will see that up until 2022, there's been virtually no change. And in fact, if anything, it's getting a little drier. The worst, wettest year was in 1893.
And the really sensible thing would be, like, don't build your town on a floodplain.
Yeah. But, it doesn't have to be a floodplain. That's just my point. When Tuckambill Canal, when it was open, we didn't get serious flooding here, where I'm sitting.
Right.
Tuckambill Canal. The Greenies came along and closed the Tuckambill Canal. And water, which would normally go down the Tuckambill Canal, came down here. They built a highway where the culverts got jammed up with vegetation, and then the water that was banked up along the highway made its way down here. Coincidentally, at the same time, the floodwaters arrived from Lismore. So we got a double bang.
Oh, boy. Yep.
But honestly, it's just government incompetence, and it's going on. They're talking of spending $700 million in this area to raise houses and relocate people. It would cost us $200 million to build the Dunoon Dam, and we would have the water security.
Yes, but you can't build dams because then you're going to flood habitat and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Well, but this is the other nonsense as well. Water brings life. And what's more, when you build a dam like the Dunoon Dam, you then have to quarantine a large tract of land around Dunoon, so you can't have industrial activity or pollution running into your dam. Dams bring a plethora of bird life. They bring along all the lizards, the goannas, and all the wild animals, right? Believe me, if you build a dam, you actually put the nature on steroids. This idea of, if we build a dam, we're desecrating nature, that is baloney, absolute baloney. You only have to go to Lake Pedder to see what an incredible place it is now in terms of wildlife. It is just gobsmackingly beautiful, right? And that's what will happen here. But once again, we're being driven by communists and Marxists, people who do not have our interest at heart.
That's so clear. I wanted to say too, just quickly, what comes to my mind when I look at that Lismore rain record is when did Dorothea McKellar write, I love a sunburnt country? There's your droughts and flooding rains. So from above 2,000 millimeters per annum down to 500, Yeah, that's it. Like, she was writing about this. I don't know how old that poem is, but this is nothing new. That's what I'm saying. This is nothing new. This is a continent with extreme weather patterns. Yeah. Okay.
What
So
we'd like to do is, with that $700 million, and I believe it's achievable, we could organise that responsible amounts of water are taken from this area, which has a surfeit of water, and we could put it to the west. If we did that, we could open up an area as large as the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. It would put our food production, it would double our food production capability, which we can.
But that wouldn't fit with we're way past Earth's carrying capacity, and we just don't have enough land to grow food for all the people, Kevin. So we have to reduce the population. Yeah, so that's what's wrong with your idea.
Yeah,
and it worked too well. All right,
and you see where the dotted blue line, which by the way is using exaggerated measurements, which we've already dealt with.
Yes,
with the exaggerated measurements. It's the reality is way below what the IPCC
is. So far off the models, so far below the models.
All of the models.
Yeah. So in other words, the models are garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. And I really recommend to listeners that they listen to Jordan Peterson talking with Professor Dr. Richard Lindzen. And he is fabulous. And everything he says, I absolutely agree with. It coincides with exactly what I've been taught and what I've practiced. The Northern Hemisphere is in 1979 is having. I'm just looking to see when this was written, but the Northern Hemisphere is having one of its snowiest winters since records began.
2020, so March 2020. Yep.
Yeah. And that if people are talking about how the ice caps are melting, they are not. This is Northern Hemisphere snow extent, 1967 to 2020. It's an upward trend. Severity of cyclones. The severity of cyclones are decreasing over the last 4 decades. So much for the climate crisis.
Yes, I believe it was Judith Curry who said the frequency of the storms is decreasing, but the severity is increasing. I might have that inverted anyway. There is a change over time, but the net result is actually less damage.
Yes. Yeah, look,
less damage to human life and
the severity are dropping off at this moment. But by the way, that could change. I mean, all I'm saying is that anybody who is, saying that it's a catastrophe and the world's
the IPCC report itself specifically says that we have found no evidence that there's been an increase in extreme weather events. I know Malcolm Roberts again was up in the Senate saying, saying, hang on a minute, here's what the IPCC says. We don't have any evidence of an increase in catastrophic weather events linked to, climate change. And then all the government bureaucracies are saying, yes, there is an increase in extreme weather events. It's like, where's this science you're following? No. And of course, their answer is, well, we checked with the other department and they agreed with us. Oh, great. I asked my mate and he reckons I'm right.
And And I think 100,000 a year. Did you see that where I think it was Senator Roberts asked the head of that department that's basically overseeing the destruction of Australia. He gets paid $900,000+ a year. It's obscene, and the guy's an idiot.
Our taxpayers' money just being torched. Yeah. Oh, so this is the wildfires. Okay.
And you and I've already dealt extensively that if we could get back into our national forests and have proper logging there, using companies that operate on a tender basis, and to rules, we would keep this right down.
And you can see again, that the wildfire, the loss of acreage to wildfires really. Oh, I'm sorry, I think we've got a delay.
No, that's okay.
The loss of acreage peaked in that period in the 30s when there was a temperature spike.
Yeah, and it was not only the temperature spike, there wasn't proper management of the forest. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the people. We have the resources, but we don't do proper forestry management and hazard reduction.
Yep.
Okay, drought severity in the US, it's not got worse. If anything, it's got less. Australia, this is up to 2010. And by the way, these can change, but the reality is at this time from 1900 to 2013, droughts have become less severe. We still have droughts, but they are than what the poor people had to put up with during the 20s and 30s, and 40s for that matter.
It was a large part of what drove the Depression, apart from world economic activity.
I've actually run this guy, Daniel Fitzhenry. He's a real person and he is highly credible. And what this says is that from 1914 to the present day, approximately, it might be 2018 or whatever, the Pacific Ocean has actually dropped by 60 millimetres. Yes. The water is not...
This is measured at Fort Denison. I've seen those photos. You say, like, where's the climate change? There's no rising sea levels here.
Well, I asked him about this and he said, look, what I have done is taken into account the alignment of the planets, because the planets also affect the height of tides as well as the moon, not to the same, but you have to take them into account. And once you take them into account, you find that up to 2019, the water level has dropped by 60 millimetres. And we're being told, and by the way, Australia's paying millions of dollars to the Pacific Islanders on the scam that somehow global warming is causing them to no longer have a place to live, when in fact most of the islands have increased in area by about 25%. And that's because they're actually rising up out of the water.
Yes, I was going to say, again, I mean, there's this whole simplifying of these complex atmospheric interactions down to CO2 is just nonsense, because you've got tectonic plates that are actually, moving, pushing areas of land up closer to other areas of land. You've got, of course, the undersea volcanoes. So, yeah. Oh, right. So, okay, we've got tide gauges from Northern Territory, West Australia, South Australia, all over the country.
Yep. And it goes from about 1960, approximately, I would say 1965, through to 2010. And you will notice that there is no real change. If anything, there is a slight decrease in some. Now,
I mean, I'm looking at, say, Mackay and Townsville, and they are ticking up, but I'm just looking at previous highs. It looks like they are ticking up to previous highs logged in the early 1990s.
Now, recently, they have started working out how far a tide gauge is from the centre of the Earth. It's sort of like important, because if the land around the tide gauge is going up, then the ocean is falling, and if the tide gauge is being, subsiding, then it appears as though the oceans are rising. Gotcha. You need to measure the distance from the centre of the Earth. Another confusion or confounder in this is the fact that the Earth's shape is changing, still changing, as a consequence of the ice having melted from the last ice age, where there were kilometres of ice on certain parts of the world, which are no longer there.
Does the shift in polarity have anything to do with this, by the way? Sorry, that was just a random thought that popped into my head. Reversal of the magnetic poles.
Oh, now that's a good one. The magnetism of the Earth actually repels cosmic rays. If the Earth's magnetic field flips, as it did 65 million years ago, guess what happened 65 million years ago?
Dinosaur extinction?
All the dinosaurs died. The cockroaches, those things that lived underground, survived.
Yeah, right. Okay,
so we should hope that the magnetic field, if it does flip, it flips quickly, because if it doesn't, we're all going to get roasted by cosmic rays.
Practice, aren't we? God, all right. Well, that's a reassuring thought.
And honestly, Robin, the more I get involved in science, the more I think I become spiritual. I'm not telling you that there's a God, a person up there in the
Big Daddy in the sky with beard and all that stuff.
Looking after us specifically. But all of these things that have happened, they are just, to me, amazing, because they have caused us to exist. Without this strong magnetic field that we have around the Earth, we would get roasted by cosmic rays, and no organism would live on this planet.
Yeah, it is quite extraordinary when you look at all the other planets that have been discovered, and the fact that there is no life, like the number of factors that needed to line up to support life on this planet. It really does really does make you, question the idea of total randomness, or me anyway. So I'll speak for myself. We're looking. What are we looking at here? We've got a number of different. I'm gathering like a number of different measurement systems for tides. Yeah.
Yeah. When the CSIRO took over, they used a different datum point. And the consequence was that there was a 48 millimeter rise. It didn't. It basically. We didn't have the world rise. The water rise by 48 millimeters.
It's all about what you're measuring with, and I mean, from my field, health science, we see so many examples of this. I mean, for instance, if a person gets their bone mineral density tested on one particular device, and then that very same day they go get it tested on another device, there can be a discrepancy of up to 20%. So a person could be told, "Oh, you have serious osteoporosis," which, by the way, is a total bollocks diagnosis. But anyway, you need to go on these medications. But then the other place they got their bone mineral density measured at might say, "No, you're actually fine. Maybe a bit low normal, but you're okay." And it's the same in virtually every other. I could give you so many more examples of this. The point is, the instrument that you're using to measure the thing that you're interested in, it makes an enormous difference to the readout. Again, it's like it's not exactly garbage in and garbage out, but you need to have some method of sort of calibrating or integrating these different systems. Otherwise, you get nonsense, like we're seeing on this chart, where it appears that suddenly the tides were nearly 5 centimeters higher. Yeah. Okay.
You've mentioned before about ice. On the left-hand side, we have 1989. Then we have, you notice it's all the 11th of May, same time each year.
Same time of the year. Yep.
And the last one is 2022, I think. I've just moved. Oops, I did something wrong there. My apologies. I'm trying, and now I've got it. I'm just trying to move me out of the way there. It is 2022. Now, if you look at the ice in 2022, you can see that it's actually grown a little. If you look up to the top left-hand area, below where Russia is written, over on the sea, you notice how big it's gotten?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So for my, I had a comment, I'm sure you saw it on the post where I asked for people's questions, of someone who was absolutely insistent that Arctic sea ice area has decreased. What is that person seeing that's different to what you and I are looking at right now?
Well, they're listening to people. There are people. I listened to the ABC the other day. I usually don't, but I'm planning on actually doing a podcast where I take apart what Jennifer Morgan, who is an American who has now been adopted by the Germans to be their climate czar at the UN or the IPCC, I'm not sure which, but she's a lady who holds a degree in arts, and that, of course, makes her
that's a good background.
Qualified. To talk about.
That's pretty much the background all the fact checkers have, as I understand it. People with BA, writing fact checks on.
Well, it was one long litany of rubbish that came out, and the ABC commentator was lapping it up and adding to the conversation and so forth. And I'm thinking, my God, this is our national broadcaster, and they are effectively propagandists for the Chinese Communist Party. Benefiting the Chinese Communist Party. I've actually written to Ita Buttrose in the past, and to her credit, she wrote back to me and actually hand addressed the envelope and hand signed the envelope, the letter. And I said to her, look, this is what's happening to power prices. Here's a graph of temperature, and the temperatures are actually dropping. Please go back to your people and tell them to do some proper research. She wrote to me saying that she'd handed it to the management team, and of course it just continued on as if I'd never written to her.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
very disappointed. I met Ita's uncle here. He's a lovely fellow, and I suspect that Ita too is a lovely person, but unfortunately she's just a figurehead. She's working for the devil.
The bureaucracy.
They are destroying Australia.
Yeah.
Now, this is something which should, to me, it's very interesting. As a mechanical engineer, I loved the P-38. It was the most amazing aircraft, the engineering find it. But they had to crash land on Greenland, and when they went back to try and get one of these planes to rebuild it, most probably 50 years later, it was under 300 feet of ice.
That's extraordinary.
So the ice is melting. How did this plane end up under 300 feet of ice?
Just to play devil's advocate, is this a glaciated area? Could a glacier have moved over?
No, it's not. No.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, the planes would have made their way towards the sea to be 300 feet under the ice.
Yeah, right.
Feet under the ice is 300 feet under the ice. Somehow the ice got on top of the plane.
Yeah. So 300 feet. I mean, that's a lot of ice. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so sunspot activity. Yeah.
Now, somebody said that when you've got sunspots, they're cooler parts of the sun.
Yes, that was actually one of my regular commenters, Robin, who is another Robin, and she is a smart cookie. Yeah. So her point was, when you see the picture that we have on the right there, absence of sunspots or lower number of sunspots, the sun is actually emitting less heat, and therefore temperatures on Earth are cooler. So that's correct. Yeah. And I've heard about this grand solar minimum, that we're heading for a grand solar minimum, which means temperatures are going to decrease. Let's
deal with one thing at a time. Firstly, when you have lots of sunspots, the sun is irradiating a heck of a lot more radiation than when you don't have sunspots.
What are those sunspots? What's actually happening there on the sun?
Storms. That means that it's bubbling like crazy, like a molten cauldron. It's like just
a giant volcano. Yeah.
You get these huge solar flares coming out when you've got massive sunspot activity. And if a solar flare hits Australia, hits the world, it can zero all of your electronic equipment. You know, the EMP that those things bring, the electromagnetic pulse that is brought by a solar flare, is quite amazing. It actually had one back in the 1800s. Evidently, you know, the electricity flowed down all the telegraph wires and everything and caused people to get shocked. But just to get rid of that rumour, a sun with lots of sunspots is in a shed load of turbulence and is off a heck of a lot more radiation than a quiet sun, which
means Earth gets a lot hotter during that.
Well, once again, as Professor Richard Lindzen and Happer have pointed out, we have numerous sort of feedback loops. Luckily, this brings me back to this creation thing. You know, I just look at all the sorts of things that all work together to allow us to exist. And one of them is water vapor. If it's hot, more water goes up into the air, more clouds, it reflects the radiation, it causes rain, yada, yada, yada. You know, it's not.
Yeah. In other words, there's a complex feedback cycle. Yeah. And that will tend to limit significant changes in climate, or will tend to sort of correct, I suppose. So it gets hotter, there's more evaporation, there's more clouds, and then the clouds kind of bounce radiation back, which cools things down as well as increasing the amount of rainfall. Did I get any of that wrong? Or
no, bang on target, exactly that. And the big takeaway is that there are so many different influences that influence the climate on Earth. It utterly confounds people to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. And this is the problem with the models, because, you know, at least with the technology we currently have, you cannot possibly create a model that actually incorporates all of these different factors, whether that be, you know, tectonic shifts, whether that be the Milankovitch cycles, whether that be the sunspots, the cloud formation, like to try to create a model that incorporates all of these different influences. I suppose, you know, it is possible to do such a thing with enough computing power, but that sure as hell isn't what the IPCC is doing.
Well, and Professor Richard Lindzen and also the latest Nobel laureate, Professor Clauser, have both.
I believe got cancelled.
Yeah, but he said
wrong thing.
The models do not take into account the change of state of water. on this planet. They don't take it into account. I'm gobsmacked by that.
That is bonkers. That is bonkers. I mean, that's such a major, major influence. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, look, this shows you 16 celestial influences that affect the Earth's climate.
Good God.
And most probably in descending order of magnitude, e.g. that the lunar orbital cycles have a very great effect on the Earth's climate. The Schwaber is really interesting. That's the orbit of Jupiter, and it is related. The sun's cycles go in tune with the Schwaber cycle, and that is actually the gravitational effect that Jupiter has on our sun. And so, in other words, the tail wags the dog to some extent.
Yeah, and I see the number of years for each cycle is like there's a huge variation. Oh, right. So I see you've got them in ascending order of just how long.
Yeah, I believe so.
And again, I mean, creating a model that takes all of this into account. I guess once again, with enough computing power, you could do this. But who is actually inputting all of this into their model? This is just extraordinary. Now,
the third one, the magnetic field reversal of the sun on the sun, is what Professor Dr. Valentina Zarkova's team have now modelled, and their model, it appears, is fairly accurate. This magnetic field is really significant because the sun goes through a cycle.
Yeah.
Before we even go there, though, we've talked many times about what happens with influences. And here we've got billiard balls all oscillating at a different rate.
Yes, they will all let go at the exact same moment. Yeah.
I should have actually not had the sound in there, but you can see that you're getting all of these really strange patterns. Well, that is exactly what happens to the climate on Earth. All the influences are asynchronous. They're not in tune with each other. And depending on where you are in the millennium, you will have different patterns happening.
Yeah. This is I watched it because you sent me this last night, and I watched this through, and it's just absolutely fascinating how you get all of these different patterns forming. And there appear to be moments of chaos, and then it quickly goes back into an ordered pattern. But it cycles through various different patterns. What might appear at any given moment to be chaos is actually just perhaps a stopping point in between one ordered cycle and the next. It's just that we can't see it depending on where, what moment in time we're looking at it. Right.
This is the sun's cycles. There are 11-year cycles affected by the orbit of Jupiter, and you will notice that the sun's output is getting less and less and less.
So this is the grand solar minimum that we're looking at.
No, it's actually the solar minimum, not the grand solar minimum. And I'll get why it's grand in a moment.
We'll get to that. Okay. All right. So by 2037, we're going to be putting our winter woolies on here in central Queensland. Ew, I don't like the sound of that. Okay.
We've had a solar minimum in the 1800s, but we haven't had a grand solar minimum for 343 years.
Yeah.
The solar minimum was the Maunder minimum.
Yes, and this was when so this was during Elizabethan times, right? When people were actually skating on the Thames, like it was frozen over. They had winter markets on the River Thames.
Yep. Yeah. So look, in 2025, you can see that it's going to get really cold, but by 2037, it's going to get very cold.
And what's really interesting? Okay, so I'm looking at where 2030 lies on that, and as you know, 2030 is a big year for these people that we've been obliquely referring to, and so we can see there's a big dip in 2025, and then it gets warmer after that. So the first thing I was thinking of is, whoa, if 2025 is going to be that cold, what does that do to the whole climate change narrative? But then of course you get this uptick in temperature, and they get to say, see, we told you the Earth is really getting warmer by 2030.
Or they could say, look, because we reduced all of our emissions, it's getting colder.
Yeah, right. So you just bend the data to, like, what is that saying? Torturing the data until it confesses. Yeah.
True. So anyway, now what makes a solar minimum grand? Cosmic rays. When the magnetic field of the sun collapses, and this is what Professor Zarkova's team have worked out, that there are, I think, 4 generators within the sun that create a magnetic field. And when those 4 counteract each other, the sun's magnetic field collapses or goes to near collapse. That causes more cosmic rays to enter the solar system, which in turn results in more cosmic rays impacting on the Earth's upper atmosphere. When cosmic rays impact on the Earth's upper atmosphere, they cause cloudiness. And this cloudiness reflects the sun's radiation, accentuating the already declined output of the sun. That's what makes it grand. And we're in for a whopper.
When is this predicted to occur? The next
the nadir will be 2035 by my calculations. Now, Professor Zarkova has said basically around 2030, going 2040. She's been a little more liberal, but I reckon on the basis of what I'm seeing that somewhere around 2035 will be the nadir. But the reason I say that is that there is an inertia in the Earth's biosphere. And so although things have, like the radiation has dropped right off a cliff, we've still got heat here and we've got ocean currents and they will sustain us. So the actual temperature lags behind the lack of radiation, if you understand what I mean. Okay, but believe me, between 2030 and 2040, I have every confidence that Professor Zarkova is right on the money. And this is what we're getting. And this further reinforces, we're now starting to get spectacular displays of cosmic rays hitting the Earth's magnetosphere. That's what this is. That's what causes these amazing displays. Okay.
This was a doozy. Yeah, I saw this being shared around on the space formerly known as Twitter, and this was just extraordinary. So this was a study that was published in Lancet, right?
That's right. They fiddled with the scales.
Yeah.
This is the real scale, where the scale on the left and the right are exactly the same.
We can see just how many more people die of cold than die of heat.
Yes. In developed countries, effectively. That's from Denmark down to southern Europe.
Yep.
And you can see that very few people die of heat. A hell of a lot of people in the highly populated areas die of cold. And cold killed us. And I could take you through that because I've studied virology.
Do you happen to have the original version of that? I might just link to that when I send out the notes for this.
Sure.
Because the original version that was published in the Lancet, as you say, they fiddled with the scale and made it look as though heat-related deaths were on par with cold-related deaths, when in reality, just far more people die of cold than extreme heat. Yeah.
What I'm showing you here is that as we've injected more and more intermittent power into our grid, the cost of electricity has gone up and up and up and up.
Intermittent power basically meaning solar and wind.
Yeah, solar and wind.
Yep.
Because you imagine you're running a baseload facility, say a big coal electricity plant, and all of a sudden someone's now putting in a gigawatt of power from rooftops. I've got to somehow drop my electricity production by a gigawatt. How am I going to do that? Well, first off, what I do is I inject it into the ground. I just basically pour my electricity into the ground. I also, at the same time, let off the steam pressure on my turbines and slow my turbines down. But you cannot easily shut down a coal-fired power station. A gas one and a diesel one are far more reactive, but they're also much more expensive. The gas is about 30% more expensive than coal, brown coal in particular. And diesel, I have no idea, most probably twice as expensive. This is what's happened to, I put there a 1.3 trillion, but I just received my tax rebate and they tell me that we're only $983 billion in debt.
Well, that's reassuring, isn't it?
But if I add,
they probably did with that extra couple of bill what the Australian Bureau of Statistics did with the extra, couple of thousand excess deaths. They just kind of do a little bit of jiggery pokery with the numbers, and poof, all those extra dead people just disappear. They didn't really die, or they.
I have to confess that I thought I was wrong, but I'm mistaken. It's 1.3 trillion. And that is that you have to add the state's debt. And
right, I'm with you. Okay.
New South Wales is 93 billion, with 53, by the way, billion of unfunded liabilities. Queensland, as a consequence of milking the coal, is not in such a bad state, and Western Australia, thanks to milking the iron ore industry, they're not in such a bad state. But all the work, chappies, and I include the Berejiklian government in that. I have no time for them whatsoever. You might notice that I'm something of a political agnostic. I think they're all bloody terrible. So, they've all led us to this one way or the other.
Yeah.
This is what's happened. As of 2018, electricity was costing 6 times more than it did in 2008 in real terms. In other words, measured against the consumer price index.
So what we're being told is that, renewable energy is capable of replacing so-called fossil fuel generated energy, that it will make the electricity supply cheaper, and the evidence points in exactly the opposite.
Okay. And we're being lied to yet again by idiots.
Now, for those who sort of watch so far and are questioning, or certainly are open to questioning the narrative that increased carbon dioxide emissions are going to be the death of all of us. There might still be some who are saying, but what about all the other emissions from coal-fired power plants? What about the mercury that they put out? What about the fine particulate matter and the effect that has on people's health? What would your response be to that?
We have scrubbers on the chimneys such that the air coming out of a coal-fired power station is to a very high level of purity. And you mentioned, for example, mercury. Another is sulfur dioxide. The sulfur dioxide can be used for making sulfuric acid, which is an essential element for industry.
So there is technology for actually capturing those emissions and repurposing them for
catch the mercury, because it's used in various medicinal compounds and so forth. We have scrubbers, and our power stations, I think, everybody, like Australians always say, we are the best in the world, but I think that's truly the case. I think that our power stations are among the best, if not the best in the world, in terms of the purity of the air coming out of the power station. What you see out of the chimney is steam, moisture.
Right. Okay, which might still be, a driver of some sort of climatic alteration, though, because as you said before, water. Well, if we haven't made it abundantly clear before, water vapor is a primary driver of temperature change. Right?
Yes, and I want lots and lots of it, and I want to get it inland into the over the western side of the Great Dividing Range,
because that would increase precipitation.
Water security to everybody on the western side of the Great Dividing Range. Be wonderful. What that could do to our country, right? And instead of that, they are now spending $100 billion, well past what it would cost to divert responsible amounts of water from the eastern seaboard into the west. They're spending $100+ billion buying crap from China, helping the Communist Party again, buying from Communist China to desecrate and ruin our lands. And at the end of it, we're going to have all of this waste which cannot be economically recycled.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, this is toxic waste, right? There are many toxic elements in these solar panels, and I know the wind turbines can't be recycled because there's just so many toxic elements in them, and so they're just literally thrown on the scrap heap, and then those toxic elements actually leach into the soil, into the groundwater. What an absolute disaster. What a catastrophe. Now, before we move on to what we do about this, and you can answer this as actually two questions. So answer these as briefly as you can, because we've already spoken for so long. I'm really enjoying this. I'd love to speak to you longer, but I don't know how many listeners are still tuning in. But anyway, okay. First of all, where do you stand on nuclear?
Oh, I actually caused there to be an experiment at ANSTO where we bombarded a thorium target with high energy particles generated by a 1 MeV particle accelerator, which ANSTO had, to check whether we could make I'm trying to think of the name of it now, a thorium reactor, which is that's the word I was looking for, an accelerator-driven thorium reactor. I am absolutely 100%, in fact, 200% in favour of nuclear energy. When I first started up an engineering consultancy, you wouldn't believe it, but one of the persons who applied for a job with me was a chief scientist from the Ukraine. And he said, this is in 1997, he said, "You Australians are the stupidest people I've ever met.
You pull our uranium out of the ground and we send it
uranium deposits.
Yeah.
If you really want to stop nuclear proliferation, what you should do is refurbish nuclear reactor rods. You actually rent the nuclear reactor rods to anybody who has a nuclear reactor. And if they don't bring those rods back, you don't give them any more refined uranium."
Right. Okay. So you can, in other words, you can stop that.
In 1997, he said you would easily earn $1 trillion a year just from that industry if you did it.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, we are governed by truly stupid people.
Now, all right. This raises a really like a question that has just gnawed at my mind for so long, and that is it's the Hanlon's razor, aphorism, right? Never ascribe to malice what can be easily explained by stupidity. But certainly with the COVID debacle, I felt like we passed the limits of Hanlon's razor pretty early on. Like, it just wasn't possible for everyone in the bureaucracy to be that freaking stupid. They just couldn't all be that dumb. I'll grant you, down in the lower orders of the bureaucracy, they probably are pretty dumb. Higher up though, they couldn't possibly have been that stupid. And so at some point, stupid doesn't explain enough, and you've got to go to the other possibility, which is malice. So where do you stand on that?
100% with you. I at the beginning of this conversation that we're having, I told you that most humans usually are binary in that they pick one thing that's causing them grief. But in this case, the nuclear industry has been suppressed by the coal industry, because the coal industry saw that as being a major competitor, and they no longer
and they have vast lobbying power. I mean, the coal industry has enormous lobbying power.
But they don't feel that way any longer, by the way, because they now export a lot of coal overseas. So they're not worried if there happens to be competitors for coal here, namely nuclear. Right. The Chinese Communist Party. The last thing the Chinese Communist Party wants is for Australia to be a nuclear power. For Australia to be able to refine uranium to the point where we could have nuclear weapons. Now, a lot of people in this country, for some reason or another, a cultural cringe, think, Australia shouldn't have nuclear weapons. Well, China's got nuclear weapons. Israel's got nuclear weapons. South Africa.
They only just admitted that. I mean, the rest of the world's known that for years, and they've always denied it. And then suddenly, while they're busy bombing the crap out of Palestine, someone pops up and says, "Oh, we could nuke them." And like, well, thanks for actually admitting it, putting it out on the table and telling the truth. Yes, Israel has nukes, and they've had them for a long time.
And as a long-serving member in the Defence Force, I can tell you that we could have acquired nuclear weapons over a long weekend if we needed to. The F111 was deliberately purchased so it could deliver nuclear ordnance as far as Jakarta, without actually pointing to them as being the the target of our intentions, which they weren't, by the way. I've already explained to you that our thinking in the 1980s, at least, was how can we help our neighbours be prosperous and happy? Because if we can succeed in that, then we will have an ally.
Yeah,
and
they're
actually played tennis against Indonesian.
Except for poor old East Timor, though. You know, let's screw them. We want the natural gas because.
But honestly, it's really complex. That Whitlam gave the Indonesians East Timor.
Yes, Whitlam, I know. He sold Timor out.
Gave New Guinea independence when they were nowhere near ready to take it on. Right. And once again, you come to this, I wonder whether it was incompetence or whether it's part of the whole thing, because Whitlam was a Fabian, so was Hawke, and they are their what do you call it? Their emblem is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
A wolf in sheep's clothing. Anyone who doubts this, by the way, look it up. You know, that logo of the Fabian Society is literally a wolf who has draped itself in, you know, the hide of a dead sheep. I mean, you can't. It's like when people tell you who they are, believe them.
And you know, almost half the population of East Timor was murdered by the Indonesians.
Yeah.
By Indonesian backed militias, right? Not the Indonesians not back in Jakarta, but the peripheral organizations were absolutely murderous to the Christians in East Timor.
Yeah,
Australia was right to move in, and then once again, because of incompetence and so forth, we could not get it right. And we did not handle it well, and we still don't handle it well, because a condition we should have imposed upon the East Timorese was that they would energetically teach English as a second language, and they would remove the embargo that no one in government can participate in government in Timor unless they speak Portuguese. Okay, that's the sort of nonsense that's going on up in Timor. So they've got a long way to go, and they're doing certain things which will keep them impoverished, and giving people access to a lot of money from gas. You only end up with what you have in Saudi Arabia, which is a lot of people on the government teat who have totally lost any drive or imagination.
And then there's a vast underclass that does, you know, quite literally the dirty work. Yeah. Yeah.
So the world's never perfect, and there are a whole lot of things that are not right there.